Thank you very much, Chairman. Getting you all settled down is very much like being at Harper Adams. It's that bit when you say to the crowd, just shut up, it's my turn now. I've been asked to come here today to talk about valuing ecosystem services. Let's try to move on from the language of ecosystem services. What I'm going to try to do this morning is to tell you a story, make a point, and perhaps throw out a challenge to you as well, to add to those that you've already heard from some of the other speakers. First of all, a story about peat. Here is peat. Do we think that that is happy-looking peat or sad-looking peat? Hands up if you think that is happy-looking peat. Hands up if you think it's sad-looking peat. Hands up if you don't have a view at all that you've expressed so far. I'd like to get everybody involved. Thank you for that. That is not very good-looking peat because it's rapidly running away down the hill. That's on the edge of that iconic place in the Peak District, Kinder Scout. I've been doing a lot of work on peat in the southwest of the country, and our peat looks far better than that. The history of peat is a very interesting one. While the Ministry of Agriculture was very keen on paying grants for drainage and so on, lots of drains were put into peat to take the water away, to increase the stocking capacity, and to improve farm profits. While that had phenomenal effects on lowland soils, perhaps the benefits may be seen as a little more marginal in upland soils because the method of draining was very different, for one thing, consisting essentially of shallow grips. You can see the distinctive pattern that they live in the picture on the left there. You can see one in reality on the picture on the right. It's that small dent in the ground. There's not actually much to see when you look at it, is there really? But that does take away surface water and helps to increase the carrying capacity of that peat. Of course, we have historically cut peat to burn it and to do all sorts of other things with it. I've done a lot of work on Exmoor with this project, and peat cutting of this sort carried on there until the closing years of the 20th century. You might not be able to see the caption on that picture, but it says, "A lonely peat cutter on Exmoor." That must have been a fun job and very mentally stimulating and satisfying, I think. So, what goes wrong with peat? Here we see the first picture of, or the first stage of peat about to go through some kind of process of breakdown. You can see that the surface is broken, pools of water are starting to form, and what will happen next is that the peat will start to be washed away in heavy rainfall, and it will end up looking like that sad, lonely lump of peat sitting on top of the underlying rock on the edge of Kinder Scout. So how is this problem to be solved if you want to keep this as happy-looking peat? This is what you have to do. You have to get a couple of women to go and stand out in the middle of Dartmoor, and the peat will suddenly become much happier. Now, what they are standing in the midst of is a series of little bunds that have been put in place to hold back the water so that the sphagnum mosses can quietly grow and recolonise those pools, thus forming new peat. Now, this isn't an overnight job by any means, the making of peat. It probably competes with watching paint dry in terms of its dynamic attraction, but basically if you are growing peat, particularly in the southern parts of the country, it's not quite as exciting in the more northern parts, you'll get about 10 centimetres of that greeny top growth in a year. You'll realise why I'm doing this in metric in a moment or two. That's about 4 inches. That 10 centimetres will become about 10 millimetres of the brown matted material underneath it. And that 10 millimetres will in turn become about 1 millimetre of peat. So it's a pretty slow job, this growing of peat. And you can see why I did it in metric, because that would have been 4 inches, becomes half an inch, becomes a 25th of an inch, which somehow doesn't have the same ring to it, does it really? Let us see then why we might be interested when we are looking at paying for sustainability and so on in the story of peat. For those of you who are cartographically minded, close your eyes while I show you these slides, because there we have Exmoor, instantly recognisable to you all by its distinct shape, I'm sure. For the story we're looking at today, what we're interested in is the part of Exmoor that is drained by the River Barle. There it is, flowing down into the River Exe, and there's a little picture of it. Now, if we complete our map of the area, to the east of the River Exe is a river called the Hadio. This was impounded in the mid-1970s to form the Wimbleball Reservoir. There it is, there's the Wimbleball Reservoir. This is an unusual reservoir, a really quite useless reservoir in fact, because it is a reservoir which, taken from year to year, cannot be guaranteed to replenish itself. If it rains a lot over the winter, the reservoir will fill up, but if it doesn't, it won't. However, the reservoir also has an unusual role as reservoirs go. Its role is this. Water from the River Exe is used to provide the drinking water to Exeter and to Tiverton. When the level of the Exe drops below a certain level, the extraction licence which South West Water has says you must stop extracting unless you substitute the water with, that you are taking out with some water that you put in. It is on those occasions that somebody in South West Water opens one of 3 taps on the Wimbleball Reservoir and lets water flow down the River Hadio and into the Exe to keep the level up above the threshold of the extraction licence. But that's not an instant job like filling the bath, because when they see the level just dropping to the critical point down at Exeter, they need to have switched on the water up at Wimbleball about a day ago, because that's how long it takes to get down there. So if they switch it on and it rains heavily overnight, they flushed away a load of water that they didn't need to. So what happens to put the water back that they've let out? This is where the Exbridge pumping station comes into play. What the Exbridge pumping station does is to extract water from the River Exe in the winter months and pump it back up to the reservoir. This is no mean undertaking. Alan, you mentioned these big bits of green recreational kit parked in sheds. The engines on this put that sort of stuff into the shade. There are 3 pumps in there which are capable of pushing this water 5 miles across country and lifting it 120 metres in height. Each of those pumps can move 50 megalitres a day. I guess that's fairly meaningless, isn't it? How big's a megalitre, anybody? This little box, big fish. It's pretty big. There's 2.5 megalitres in an Olympic swimming pool, so it's 20 of those, and there's 3 pumps that can each shift one of those. What is more, the electricity supply is so feeble in Exbridge that they're all run by diesel engines. Not the sort of feeble thing you have in your big green combine harvester, Alan. No, this is the sort of stuff you have in the back of a submarine. So there's a real cost to moving this water across country when it has to be moved across country, and that is where the peat comes in. Because if all the peat in Exmoor was in the finest fettle possible, it would hold back the water very healthily. So when there's heavy rainstorms in the summer, water would be held back up in Exmoor and it would gradually seep out of that sponge in the drier periods of summer. Therefore, there would be less critical periods in the summer when the valves have to be opened on the reservoir, and therefore in the winter we wouldn't have to pump as much water back into the reservoir, and we would save money in pumping costs. So there's the story. Where's the money coming from? Do you know, I think I'm the first speaker who's told you today where the money is coming from, by not operating those pumps as much and paying it to people to manage the peat for that purpose instead. In addition to that, I probably don't need to tell this audience, but peat is absolutely fantastic for gobbling up carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, especially while you are restoring it. There's not big money in that at the moment, but DEFRA's predictions say that there will be bigger money in it over the next few years, and indeed the last month or 2 have just seen the launch of a peatland carbon code which sets out the trading conditions under which some pilot schemes may go forward to allow the trading of carbon sequestration into restored peat areas. And that's before we even get on to biodiversity offsetting and all those sorts of things. That was the story, really, of how the restoration of peatland in Exmoor may save a water company money, and some of that money may therefore be the proper reward of the people who manage that peatland, the landowners and the farmers, for looking after that peat in different ways. And so I come to a point here that new land management and valuation requirements are emerging. New markets, we've already heard about new potential health markets this morning. Farming really can be fun, apart from buying expensive bits of kit and indulging in recreational tillage on a Sunday afternoon, for example. But I think for all of us who work around farming, let alone in it, that will bring huge new challenges to what we do and how we work with our clients. but I think it will also be bringing it new opportunities and new challenges. The animals in the picture, anybody, what are they? They're reindeer. Can anybody tell me where the reindeer are in the picture?
Cairngorms.
They're in the Cairngorms, that's right. That farmer, he's somebody from overseas who saw there were no reindeer in the Cairngorms, so he bought some in. He thought that's just what they need around here. One of the biggest input costs for a livestock farmer, any of you who know about these things in the audience? Feed costs. Solved. Those people in the picture are paying not only to see, but to feed the reindeer. There we are. That's no more than I happen to have the picture, so you were getting it anyway. Payments for ecosystem services, yes, be aware that DEFRA has published its guidance on how payment for ecosystem services schemes, that's the sort of thing I've been talking about on Exmoor, may be developed. So, let us then move on to one or two other points. I was privileged to be asked a year or two ago to write a think piece for the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors under this title, International Professional Practice Challenges from Market Value to Natural Value, and there are some copies hereabouts if anybody would like some, highlighting these sorts of new opportunities, highlighting new ways of working in development, pointing out as far as valuation and evaluation are concerned that there will be new points to reflect, new metrics to be developed, new types of valuation to be performed. And so I now come to a point. If I tried to summarise pictorially the way we have traditionally worked with land, I'd suggest it looks like this. We have looked for things that we can use land for. Economically, they have traditionally been things like food, timber, sporting rights. As our 20th century approaches evolved, so we began to, there are other things as well, minerals, diversification, development. As the 20th century went on, so we started increasingly to recognise again the importance of environmental issues and sustainability. If we look at the economics of this, broadly, it was the blue bits that gave us the income, and it was the green bits that we kind of regarded as costs. I'd go on to say that there's actually been a shift in our thinking, so that, exemplified by the work of organisations like LEAF, that environment and sustainability aren't add-ons, they are cross-cutting themes of one sort or another. But now, I'd like to introduce a point which is about perhaps a new way of looking at land, a way which is presaged by the ecosystem services approach. Sorry about the language again. But let us take land as natural capital to complement the sorts of human capital we were hearing about earlier on. And if we look at how we can divide this up, provisioning services, we know all about those, food, fibre, energy, timber, those sorts of things. But equally, regulating services, carbon cycles, the water cycle, supporting services, all that good work that the bees do for us, soil formation itself, another slow job. And lastly, cultural services that we've already heard about the value of this morning, and I thought that was really inspiring actually, that first thing. And now let us think about how we are going to work with a view like that of land, because actually the red stuff is what we have in existing markets, hasn't it? Hitherto, the rest of it has been the beneficiary of varying forms of complicated public support, or has just been a free rider add-on to the whole thing. But I'd suggest that actually we're sort of entering a new paradigm here, and I think this echoes the big opportunities that Alan Wilkinson outlined, that actually we are beginning to see the emergence of new markets in areas like payments for ecosystem services, I'll whisper it, biodiversity offsetting, carbon markets, backed up by things like conservation covenants. And within that, I would offer you an analysis which says that actually we will see nothing but the decline of public support in favour of the increasing attempt to formulate a commercial market around the box called new markets on there. That's my one-slide summary of where I think land management is on a point of turning and going next. So, new ways of working, new forms of appraisal, new opportunities for sure, new values, new ways to collaborate. There we are, there's one farmer's answer to the satellite observations of the Rural Payments Agency. That was good there. Let's have it again, shall we? But a question. So having told the story, having made my point, I now throw out a challenge to you, ladies and gentlemen. And the challenge is this: will farmers be entrepreneurial enough? Should we actually be looking at a new paradigm, if I may be so bold, of farmers as ecosystem entrepreneurs? Are we up to it? That, Chairman, is the question I should like to leave you with, but just in case any of you do want to top up on your CPD, as so strongly advocated by Alan, that's how to get in touch with me and make it happen. That's the commercial plug. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, farmers as ecosystem entrepreneurs. That's my final point. A story, a point, a challenge. Thank you, Chairman.